Peter Tremblay found the monkey in the attic, tucked away in a dusty box filled with his grandfather's things. It was a toy, of course. What else could it be? It was a cymbal-banging monkey, the kind you wound up. Its fur was faded and matted, and one of its tiny red-rimmed eyes was missing. But even in its dilapidated state, there was something about it that made Peter uneasy. He felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck as he stared at it. He almost put it back in the box, but curiosity won out. He took it downstairs. His mother was in the kitchen making supper. "Look what I found, Mom," he said, holding up the monkey. She glanced at it, a flicker of something, was it distaste, crossing her face. "That old thing? Your grandfather used to play with that when he was a little boy." She turned back to the stove. "Put it away, Peter. It's probably full of dust and germs." But Peter was already winding it up. He wanted to see it work. He'd never seen a cymbal-banging monkey before, not up close. The monkey's movements were jerky and mechanical. Its faded fur jiggled as it banged the tiny cymbals together, a sharp, tinny sound that echoed in the kitchen. Its grinning, simian face with its one remaining red eye bobbed back and forth in a grotesque parody of joy. Peter watched, fascinated and repulsed at the same time. When the monkey finally ran down, it simply stopped, its cymbals frozen in midair. The silence that followed seemed even louder than the clanging had been. Peter picked it up again, turning it over in his hands. He felt a strange compulsion to wind it up again, but he resisted. There was something about the monkey, something in its stillness, that made him uncomfortable. He decided to take it up to his room. He wanted to examine it more closely, to try and figure out what it was about it that bothered him so much. He sat on his bed, the monkey clutched in his hands. He looked at it, trying to see it as just a toy. But the missing eye, the faded fur, the grotesque grin, they all combined to create an impression of something malevolent. He shivered despite himself. He thought of putting it back in the attic, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He felt drawn to it in a way he couldn't explain. He wound it up again, just once. The monkey banged its cymbals, its one red eye staring blankly ahead. The sound, which had seemed merely tinny before, now grated on his nerves. He stopped it in mid-clang, a sudden irrational fear gripping him. He put the monkey down on his nightstand, as far away from him as he could get. He turned off the light and pulled the covers up to his chin. But even in the darkness, he could still see the monkey's one red eye, growing faintly in the shadows. He lay there, listening to the silence. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside his window, sounded magnified in the darkness. He imagined the monkey sitting there on the nightstand, its one red eye watching him. He knew it was just his imagination, but the feeling of being watched was so strong, so real, that he couldn't shake it off. He closed his eyes, trying to will himself to sleep, but his mind was racing. He kept thinking about the monkey, about its jerky movements and its silent grin. He finally drifted off to sleep, but his dreams were troubled. He dreamed that the monkey was chasing him, its cymbals clanging wildly. He ran and ran, but the monkey was always right behind him, its one red eye burning into his back. He woke up with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked over at the nightstand. The monkey was still there, sitting silently in the darkness. He reached out and turned on the light. The monkey looked harmless enough in the light, just a toy. He picked it up and looked at it closely. He tried to see it as just a collection of gears and springs and faded fur, but he couldn't. There was something about it, something evil. He shuddered and put it back on the nightstand. He knew he had to get rid of it. He knew he had to, but he didn't know how. The next morning, Peter told his parents about the monkey. He told them about the feeling of being watched, about the nightmares, about the sense of unease he felt whenever he was near it. They listened patiently, but he could see the skepticism in their eyes. "Peter," his mama said gently, "it's just a toy. You're letting your imagination run away with you." His father nodded in agreement. "Maybe you should put it back in the attic," he said. "Forget about it." Peter knew they were wrong. He knew the monkey was more than just a toy, but he couldn't convince them. He tried to explain how he felt, but the words just wouldn't come out right. He felt frustrated and helpless. He knew he was on his own. That afternoon, he went to the library and looked up everything he could find about cymbal-banging monkeys. He found pictures of similar toys, but none of them looked quite like his. There was something different about his monkey, something sinister. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew it was there. He also looked up stories about haunted toys, but he didn't find anything that seemed to fit. Most of the stories were about dolls or clowns, not monkeys. He felt a growing sense of dread. What was he dealing with? He went home and found the monkey sitting on his bed, just where he had left it. He stared at it, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't live with the fear, the constant feeling of being watched. He picked up the monkey and went downstairs. His parents were in the living room watching TV. He held out the monkey to his father. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling, "you have to get rid of this." His father looked at him, his expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Peter," he said, "we've talked about this. It's just a toy." "No, it's not," Peter insisted. It's it's evil." His father sighed. He took the monkey from Peter's hand and looked at it. He turned it over and over, examining it closely. Then he shrugged and handed it back to Peter. "I don't see anything wrong with it," he said. "Just put it away." Peter felt a wave of despair wash over him. He knew he couldn't make his parents understand. He was alone. He took the monkey back to his room and sat on his bed. He stared at it, his mind racing. He had to find a way to get rid of it, but how? He thought about throwing it away, but he was afraid it would just come back. He thought about burning it, but he was afraid of what might happen. He didn't know what to do. He remembered something his grandfather had told him a long time ago. He had told him that some things, some objects, were imbued with evil. He had said that the only way to get rid of such things was to destroy them completely. Peter knew what he had to do. He went to the garage and found his father's sledgehammer. He carried it back to his room and closed the door. He placed the monkey on the floor and stood over it, the sledgehammer raised high above his head. He hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked at the monkey, at its one red eye staring blankly ahead. He thought about all the fear and unease it had caused him. He thought about the nightmares, the feeling of being watched. Then he brought the sledgehammer down. The monkey shattered into a dozen pieces. Faded fur, broken gears, and twisted metal scattered across the floor. Peter stood there panting, the sledgehammer still raised over his head. He looked down at the pieces of the monkey, and a wave of relief washed over him. It was over. He had finally destroyed it. He dropped the sledgehammer and sank to his knees. He felt exhausted, but he also felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew the monkey was gone, for good. He cleaned up the mess and put the pieces of the monkey in a trash bag. He carried the bag out to the garbage can and dumped it in. Then he went back to his room and closed the door. He lay on his bed and closed his eyes. He was still tired, but he knew he would be able to sleep now. He knew the nightmare was over. He drifted off to sleep, and for the first time in a long time, he slept soundly. He didn't dream about the monkey. He didn't dream at all. The next morning, he woke up feeling refreshed and at peace. He went downstairs and joined his parents for breakfast. They looked at him curiously, but he just smiled and told them he was fine. He didn't tell them about the sledgehammer. He didn't tell them. He didn't tell them about He didn't tell them about the sledgehammer. He didn't tell them about destroying the monkey. He knew they wouldn't understand. But he knew what he had done, and he knew he had done the right thing. The monkey was gone, and he was finally free. Or so he thought. That night Peter went to bed feeling peaceful and relieved. He fell asleep quickly and set That night Peter went to bed feeling peaceful and relieved. He fell asleep quickly and slept soundly for the first time in days. He didn't dream about the monkey. But in the morning, when he woke up, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Sitting on his nightstand amidst the scattered pieces of the monkey was one of the tiny symbols, and painted on it in faded red letters were the words, "Clang, clang, you're dead."